As India and Canada up the ante after Justin Trudeau's astonishing allegation against an Indian linked to the killing of Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar, many Indians are asking Canada one question: what about the Kanishka bombing? I'm Barkha Dutt, here with the Mojo Story. Our focus continues on the India-Canada equation, a relationship that has gone into a tailspin after Justin Trudeau pushed it to the brink. Indians are galled because Canada and the Canadian Prime Minister seem to be glossing over Canada's patronage of Khalistan terror groups and Khalistani extremists. Memories have come back of the Air India 182 bombing, the Kanishka bombing that killed 329 people. Indian families have waited all these years for justice, but only one man was ever convicted. And shortly after Trudeau became Prime Minister, a parole board actually released him. He'd been sentenced to 9 paltry years in jail, and he did not even serve those. Why are we talking about Kanishka today? Well, we'll be talking to somebody who actually lived through the aftermath of that, somebody who lost his entire family in that bombing. It's important to bring these human stories today because when we talk about terrorism and Canada's patronage of these groups, there is a human cost to what happened. And that human cost is very, very important to focus on. When there's a debate around Trudeau's patronage, the Canadian government's patronage of these groups, let's go back to the worst terror attack in Canada's history, the worst terror attack that the world has seen before 9/11. And just an ironic fact, Trudeau's father has a link to this Air India bombing. Trudeau Sr., he refused to extradite a terrorist who would later go on to actually be one of the key masterminds of that bombing. I'm talking, of course, about Talvinder Singh Parmar. So a lot to speak about. Let me introduce on the program today somebody who's very bravely agreed to come and share his story of pain, loss, anger, and the endless wait for justice. Sanjay Lazar is with us. Sanjay has been an employee with Air India, but he's here today in his capacity as a victim of that horrible sort of explosion that took place off the coast of Ireland, over the coast of Ireland. And he's here as somebody who's written an entire book on it. And let's look at this anger that Indians feel today through the eyes of an actual victim. So Sanjay, thank you. I have to thank you especially because no matter how many years go by, it's never easy to remember and recount something as painful as what you went through. You lost pretty much your entire family on board that plane. I want you to talk a little bit about who all in your family was on board AI 182.
Thank you, Barkha. First of all, yes, you're right. It was, a lifetime ago, almost 38 years to the day, literally. And I was a young kid then. Ironically, I just failed my 12th standard. That's why I was not on that plane. I uh, got the results a few days before that. I lost my dad, my mom, and my baby sister. And they left on a holiday with, actually, it was a holiday planned with a number of friends. They were all Air India crew, so everybody had families. So there were lots of families of crew members. The Toronto Montreal flight used to be almost 13 to 14 days.
Yeah.
And they all went in a group. I lost pretty much not only my family, but the support systems around me because they were friends of my dad's, friends of my mom's. And it was absolutely a bolt out of the blue. I was 17 then, not even 17. I didn't know what happened. And I just got this call and said, pack your bags, we're going to London. Till then, I didn't even have any idea of what had happened. And then to find out on the aircraft, and then when we landed in London, have all the press, go to Cork, and then experience, the most nightmarish scenario I've seen in my life. Of course, the Irish were fantastic, the way they looked after the families, but to go through the process of trying to identify bodies, to see them coming in on boats and bringing them, the entire hospital was turned into a morgue. It was horrific. It was unthinkable. And, you're right. It's painful to live it each year, but I think I joined Air India shortly thereafter. So I just think we buried all these uh, sadness and the tragedy. Um, we, as families, uh, we were nobody's children, whether we were Indians or Canadians. Nobody was investigating this matter at that time, and it was just one terrible nightmare. I waited 25 days in Cork, um, and we had the Interpol helping us with the Irish police, the Gardaí, to identify bodies, and it was mind numbing because you had to remember features of your family, physical features, write down jewelry, write down clothing,
And you're
and then
17, and you're a 17-year-old
17
boy
and
doing
alone.
this.
Yes, and it was, and we'd sit in a in that. Well, they converted the hospital into a like a control room, and every day a body would come in, or two bodies, or five, and they would put up the photographs in a room where you could go and see them, or if they matched your family member, you could. And I had three. So, I the biggest thing was, I don't know if you remember, I don't have a picture here, but the Cabbage Patch doll that was found in the sea,
Yeah,
floating. That was my
yeah.
sister's Cabbage Patch doll. I don't know if you know about Cabbage Patch dolls, but they had identification, they had birth certificates, they had everything. That was hers. So for me, that was such a painful, painful memory. And all we wanted to do, when you're in a state of distress and
Yeah.
such mind shattering condition, you want to cling to something. After denial comes, acceptance. You want to bring back the bodies. And we hunted every day. I waited and just couldn't find a body. I
Can
think they
you
were
can you it's so difficult to even hear you recounting that. I'm thinking of a 17-year-old kid, because at 17 we're children, right? Basically, a 17-year-old kid who's lost his father, his mother, and his baby sister, looking through the debris, finds a doll of his sister, has to identify these bodies. It's a child himself. Do you remember what you felt at the time?
I can't, I was so shaken I couldn't even cry. I promise you, I just didn't, you want to appear strong, you want to appear brave, but I'd go back to the hotel room at night and just let go because it was terrible. And here I was amongst so many people, and I'll tell you this, that the Air India colleagues at that time of my father were also supportive. They had their own volunteer team that flew to Cork, and they looked after, they counseled us. The Irish were, God sent, really. Uh,
Yeah.
so they
Sanjay,
stood by all of us. Yes.
Sanjay, now there was this 17-year-old child, young boy, you, who's lost your entire family. And then there's justice, the idea of justice. And what happens, and you would have, you've written a book on this, so you know that Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father, had an opportunity to extradite Talvinder Singh Parmar when Indira Gandhi was Prime Minister. She asked him to extradite him. He refused. And we
Yes.
now know from Terry Minuski's book that it was because India didn't recognize the Queen, apparently, with the same protocols as blah blah blah. Some colonial crap was used to not hand over this terrorist, and he goes on to be one of the masterminds. But there's no justice. There is no justice, and that it is adding insult to injury. So I want you to talk a little bit about, you deposed yourself, you testified.
Yes.
What was that whole process like? How did Canada protect the terrorists of the Kanishka bombing?
Barkha, you mentioned Terry, and I've engaged many years with Terry. He's become a dear friend. So has Kim, both who reported daily on this entire bombing and the conspiracy behind it. The CSIS, that's the Canadian intelligence, was actually tracking Parmar and Rayat since the December of the previous year. And they knew of their plans to make the bomb a few weeks before this. They followed them into Duncan, into Vancouver Island, where they test fired the bomb. So it's not that the Canadian
So the
authorities did
bomb,
not know.
so the bomb was test fired, and the Canadian
Absolutely,
intelligence knew
absolutely, it was
that.
test
The
fired.
Canadian intelligence knew that.
It was recorded on tape. There were recordings of how, they saw the guy go and collect the two Sanyo tuners in Duncan. He made the bomb. They went to an island. There is Vancouver Island in Vancouver, and there's Duncan. They went there. They watched the bomb being test fired. Rayat and Parmar were standing there and test fired the bomb, and a CSIS officers were watching them. No one did anything. There was no alarm bells anywhere. There were recordings which were being erased. The Canadian intelligence authorities had recordings. And all this is fact. I'm not, cooking this up, because as we speak more, you'll understand that Justice John Major went into all this, his commission. But it took us, the families, almost 10, 15 years of fighting to get some investigation. The government protected, of course, the government protected Parmar. Of course, the government concealed all this from everyone.
And by government, you mean the
I
Canadian
mean
government?
Canadians. I don't mean India. Of course, I
Yes,
mean the Canadian government.
yes,
Absolutely. And
yes.
we only got to know after the fact, after the bomb had exploded, and I lost my entire family. It took a year or two to even realize what was going on, and then we saw the investigations, and so one by one, everything got dug up. The bomb in Tokyo matched the bomb in Ireland,
So
and
explain, there's a whole generation of our audience that doesn't
yes,
know what
okay.
happened. Where was the plane going from to where?
So
What happened at the baggage carousel? Start from scratch.
yeah. So let me tell you, this starts actually, Barkha, as we all know as Indians, with the Operation Blue Star, and that was one part of history that we
Yeah,
all
but
hope
the
never
flight
happened.
itself, where was the flight going from to where?
People have forgotten one thing, that the Khalistani Commando Force had threatened to attack Air India in October the previous year after Mrs. Gandhi died. They hijacked an Air India aircraft in November of 84. People didn't connect the two. That aircraft was hijacked, and it's not even reported widely. It was
Hmm.
hijacked from Delhi to Bombay to Maldives to Seychelles, where they surrendered.
Yeah.
Parmar and companies got active after that hijack failed. The entire plan was hatched in Canada, in Vancouver, in Duncan, and Rayat was the bomb maker. Parmar, Bagri, and all the rest of them were players who were arranging finance and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Thereafter, the flight left from Bombay, Delhi, Frankfurt, Toronto, Montreal, and while coming back to London, that is when the bomb exploded. Now, the bombs were loaded in Vancouver, as you would know, uh, by some unknown person, M. Singh and L. Singh. There were two bombs loaded on two separate flights, both made in suitcase bombs in a Sanyo tuner. One was going to Tokyo, and one came to onto the Air India 182. Thereafter, the one in Tokyo landed and exploded on the baggage carousel because that flight was slightly delayed. This one blew up in midair. Now
So the plan was to blow up two planes.
well, the conjecture is to blow up two Air India planes, precisely. Actually, I wouldn't ground. If you go back to the timings of the 182, it is my theory, and it's not been widely reported, though Terry and a few others agree that our 182 was delayed by about an hour and a half. Had it
Hmm.
been on time, it would have landed at Heathrow, which was one of the busiest airports in the world at that time, and this would have blown up at the terminal.
At Heathrow Terminal.
Yes, and on the morning, it would have been crazy. And the other bomb would have burst the moment it was loaded onto an Air India jumbo out of Tokyo. So you would have had two Air India aircraft blowing up on ground, which would have been twice as much or 10 times as much damage. This is what people have not pieced together yet. Two people died in Tokyo on the baggage carousel because it burst just as it came out of the security and loaded onto the carousel. When investigators later on pieced that bomb together, the Japanese investigators, they found the Sanyo tuna, which was similar to pieces that they found in this. That's how they went back and connected it.
They connected
They
the two.
connected the two tickets were bought at the
Yeah.
same travel agent in Vancouver. They connected it was bought by one person. They connected it was M. Singh, L. Singh, and two, unaccompanied bags that went through. So that's how the conspiracy was prepared. Uh,
And what happens after this plane explodes? You have lost your whole life in one go, as have so many others.
yeah,
As a
and
17-year-old, you then begin this long fight for justice. What do you encounter when you start looking for justice?
there were two levels of one was, on a personal level, every family had its own trauma, had its own suffering, and then there were family fights and stuff like that. But that's one side apart.
Yeah,
You come back and you have relatives squabbling with you, property, and I was a young kid then. Remember, I was,
yeah,
literally just not even a major. And I was fortunate. I had my parents' friends around me who looked after me, and Ivan and Celia, and they were really, really very central to my life and made me stand up on my 2 feet again. But after the sorrow comes the outrage and the anger, and then you want to
yeah,
find out who did it. As a young 16, 17, 18-year old, you want to avenge,
yeah.
but you realize first, let's find out who did this and how they did it. And that's when you see you start looking at that nobody's investigating it. The joke is when the aircraft went down, and people were talking. It was an Air India aircraft. It was an Indian aircraft. Indian people. There was absolutely, literally no investigation here in our country. There was even less there because there was signs of a huge cover up because nobody wanted to know that the Canadian intelligence knew about this well in advance. Let me
Hmm.
also tell you that the then Prime Minister, Mr. Gandhi, was going to the US on a state visit. They expected the Sikhs to strike him at Madison Square Garden. So the FBI also was in the know. There was the US Secret Service. It's not, all this features in a number of books, and it features in the John Major Commission, which came out 10, 15 years in 2008. So it's quite possible that everybody glossed over the fact because they did not want their slip ups to come up.
Hmm.
The Air India victims, the families, got together, and we have an organization out of Canada called AIVFA, Victims Foundation, and the Victims Families Association, kept pressurizing government, consecutive governments in Canada, and through lobbying through. I remember we ourselves went to various prime ministers in India over the years. Went to Congress governments. I remember meeting Mr. Chauhan, Prithviraj Chauhan at that time, to ask them to get this investigated thoroughly. You'd have VIPs coming every year to the memorial in Cork, ministers, prime ministers, president of Ireland, but nobody would investigate and come out with the truth. It took 15 years. There was an inquiry in India by Justice Kirpal, which was just like a coroner's inquiry, nothing major. But there was a inquiry or investigation, so to speak, by Bob Ray in Canada, which was just a sham, a cover up. I remember flying to Canada for the trial, the criminal trial, and I, offered up as a witness. And after days of investigation of testimony, they found them not guilty, and that was like, I remember saying at that
Who did they find not guilty?
uh, Bagri and Parmar, everybody walked. Only Rehat was found guilty on a much
Yeah,
lesser charge. You see,
yeah.
for blowing up 329 people, uh, all the accused got away. They were found not guilty by trial. And I'll tell you this: if that was a plane full of white people, they would have been found guilty and hung. I know Canada doesn't have hanging, but they would have been put behind bars for life. That was the first fact. The second thing is, in any other part of the world, the evidence against these two would have been conclusive to prosecute them and hold them guilty. They weren't. And I felt after years of fighting for a case, our families died again, all over again. We came
Yeah.
back and then we kept lobbying again, and nobody listened to us. I think by some quirk of fate, Stephen Harper came into power in Canada, and I think the families met him and impressed upon him that we need a full-fledged commission. And I think that commission worked for quite a few years. It was under retired Supreme Court Judge Justice John Major, and
Hmm. But you
Again,
know,
I
one of the things you just said was, that was a plane full of white people,
absolutely
the men who did this would have been hung metaphorically,
yes,
though Canada
yes,
doesn't have the death penalty. Many of them were Canadian citizens, but most of them were Indian Canadians. Is that
yes.
the difference?
Well, the difference was in those days nobody cared about whether you were Indian, Canadian, or anything if you were not Caucasian. Let's be honest. I'm talking about the 80s. I'm not talking
Yeah.
about 2020. I'm talking about the 80s. And maybe a large number of them were immigrants. And I've said this, you know, even in the media 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I remember going on, news channels there saying that it was pure discrimination. The point is, when you had so much of advanced information, how do you allow a one plane full or two possibly planefuls of human beings to be blown up?
So everybody walks. The weird thing is that Ripudaman Malik, who's one of the accused, actually gets killed last year in a kind of similar way to which Hardeep Singh Nijjar gets killed. Terry Wileski thinks this could have been gang war between the two. We don't know. And you are there as this man fighting for justice who's lost his entire family, and you see everybody walk.
Yeah,
And the one
absolutely.
man who gets convicted serves only two-thirds of his sentence.
Yeah. And
And
what
he
does he
has a
get convicted for? Nothing.
yeah,
He gets
yeah,
convicted for not admitting he made the bomb, but as an accessory to a bomb making. Do you know
yeah.
he didn't get convicted for killing all these families of mine? He didn't get convicted for
If
that.
I'm not wrong, he got a 9 year sentence.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah. And he didn't even serve the full 9 year sentence.
well, he was released on parole a
Correct.
couple of years ago, and then I think he was killed by somebody in Canada. It's I remember that quite vividly. It wasn't too long ago either. But the point here is, we all went and talking about the trial, Varka, I was at a distance of less than 20 feet away from these guys. 20 to
Which
20,
guys? Which guys?
the accused in the criminal trial in Vancouver. They were put behind bulletproof glass. We were put behind bulletproof glass, but we could see them, and they were blasé as hell. After killing 331 people, they sat through the trial with grins on their faces. Let me tell you
They,
that. And it was,
1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. Just say that again. You are
I
saying
said,
when you're in the court and you're just a few feet away from these men
yeah,
who have killed your family and countless others, they were smiling in court?
they were literally, that you can't, well, I wouldn't want to say it on television, but you can't do crap to me. That kind. It was just, and I was a young guy then, but you could see that, they knew because so many witnesses disappeared. So many people died before coming to testify. There was virtually no evidence. Actually, I mean, strange things happened during that trial. And somebody has to, if you go into the actual facts, you'll realize that despite everything and all that, I mean, tell me which intelligence agency erases tape recordings?
Who erased the tapes? Which tapes were erased?
This is tapes of surveillance on Riyadh, Parmar, Bagri, all of them. Riyadh was being tracked from, December of the previous year. So his phones were tapped. There was constant surveillance on Parmar from the moment he entered Canada again. There was a video surveillance. There were people watching him all the time, and they, the Canadians knew exactly what was happening. It's not that they didn't. Let's understand that. So, with this mountain of evidence, you still could not prosecute. You could prosecute, but you couldn't convict. So that was the
So So
tragedy.
how does a man like you, how do the other victims make peace with the fact that, okay, you'll never make peace with it, but how do you live life knowing that there was no justice?
You know, the, I think just in sorrow and hoping that providence and destiny play a part somewhere. We got, I'd say, a little relief, not relief, but we got a little uh, satisfaction when we had John Major come up, Justice John Major, and he went through an entire commission and he covers all this. He covers the surveillance, the intelligence, the failures, the erasure of tapes. It's all recorded by the Canadian Supreme Court. And he said, yes, we made mistakes. This could have been stopped. We should have stopped it, and we didn't stop it. And Stephen Harper apologized to the families for everything that happened, but it still doesn't take away the fact that, you know, the killers are roaming free. Then some may have died of old age or, you know, illness or whatever. But the point is, you need closure. Every family needs closure
Yeah.
when there is a murder like this. It
Yeah.
was the biggest mass murder in aviation history until 9/11, and people don't realize that. You
Yeah.
know,
And the
300.
Canadians today don't even remember it. Like that is what really
And
gets
that's
my
what,
goat.
Barkha. This is exactly what I was discussing with friends in Canada. That the current generation of Canadians and Indians, for that matter, do not even remember the story. The Canadians, the Khalistanis, are trying to twist the narrative completely to make Rayat and Parmar out to be some kind of heroes, freedom heroes. They're not. They're killers. Let me tell you, this is not the sentiment of Sikhs. This is a small fringe group. The Sikhs are the most wonderful, peace loving human beings you would find on earth. Their service is impeccable. This is nonsense. These are not,
Yeah.
it's,
Let me ask you, when you watch what's happening between Canada and India, you watch this terrorist kill, you have no, you have the Canadians not even acknowledge, they romanticize him as a regular person. I mean, when you're watching all of this happening, Trudeau last time came to India, he invited, or his team invited a convicted militant for dinner till there was uproar, and then that invite was taken back. Now you see Kanishka totally erased from the Western media commentary. If it's not there, aviation mass murder, it's like it doesn't exist. How does it make you feel what's going on today between India and Canada?
gutted. Gutted. Number one, I can only say gutted. The first thing is rewriting history or trying to rewrite history
Yeah.
is just, pulling my heart and soul out again, like probably every single family, all of us, probably
Yeah.
you feel the same way. Secondly, you cannot escape the fact, just because a terrorist organization or some members of a terrorist organization have tried to, don new the emperor's new clothes, it doesn't change the character of that organization. You
Yeah.
won't find, even if Al Qaeda wins a seat in Pakistan tomorrow or in any other country, it's still going to be Al Qaeda. It's not going to change
And you
9/11.
and you still have this man's lawyer, Niger's lawyer, Pannu. Get,
Yeah.
he's making speeches in Canada talking about death to the
No,
Prime
they've
Minister of
conducted a
India.
referendum. I mean, look at
Yeah.
the beauty. They've conducted a referendum in Canada about my country here,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
shocking. You know,
Yeah.
Look at this. I mean, you find it so difficult to imagine. Canada is one of the most peace-loving democracies that I knew of, all my life, and to see that this is what they're helping propagate is risky and dangerous. Is risky and dangerous. I'm
I yeah, go
someone who
ahead.
believes in peace. I'm a non-violent guy. I believe in peace.
Yeah.
I don't think you know people will support this, and I believe this is just the internal politics of that nation, because there is a minority government and they need the support of radicals to survive. That is why
Yeah.
they're playing along.
Yeah.
That seems to be it.
Let me ask you a last question, Sanjay. Let's say you met Justin Trudeau somewhere after all this has happened. You're a living testimony to loss, to anger, to sorrow. And this man is literally in bed with the Khalistanis, political bed with the Khalistanis. And you had to say something to him. What would you say?
I'd say, you need to read history, and that's the reason, Barka. I Terry told me, and I'm rewriting. I'd like to put down everything so that the world, at least, it's recorded somewhere. Do you know there is no Indian book on this in the last 40 years? We're going to celebrate, no, commemorate the 40th anniversary of the bombing in 25. There's not a single book that records every single fact, like I've told you, of who did what and how and when. And I'd like to tell Justin Trudeau, open up your files and look at your own confidential files. You will know who did what. It's not, these are not freedom fighters. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
They killed, more than 100 babies. It was not 329 families or people only. Remember, out of those, there were
100
100
babies.
plus kids. Yeah, Babies,
100,
children.
babies, children, infants.
It's not, it's not something that happens every day in any, normal criminal act. This was a mass murder beyond all thing. And I don't believe that, those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. And you'd hate to see this happen again in any part of the world, to any nationality, to any airline, to anybody. I would not want to see this happen ever again. So I'd like to, you know, I'd definitely tell him, uh, dude, you better study your history. You need to know who you're in bed with, because no government, no power is worth having the blood of 331 families on your hands. That's what I'd like to say to him.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Sanjay, for sharing your sorrow and your rage. And it is a travesty that this is something that is not being, this story is not being told in the Western media. The story is being glossed over by the Canadians. It just makes my blood boil. Thank you very much for talking to
Thank you.
us, and take care, and
Thank
God
you so much.
bless.
Okay.
Thank you. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.